Hi, so up until now we checked JavaScript and CSS, but we can also leverage Java code. So how is it used in the platform? As you can see, if we go in our sample application, we have things that are in the UI side, so on the design time or runtime. But we have also things happening in the backends, mostly in the processes, rules, and web API side. So here, for example, I could have a process and I have some activities. So here I got, for example, a create record if I want to create a record instance. So it would be cool to have our own blocks, our own activities, and that's exactly what we can do. Let's say that you want to send a text message using Twilio or another vendor. Out of the box, we don't provide this functionality, but you can code your own, make it available in the palette, drag and drop it, and use it inside your process. So pretty much exactly what we did for View Designer. So that's what we are going to see, how we can do that. So we are going to create a couple of objects in this list of tutorials, and the first one is going to be an activity, a process activity. So we need to go inside bundle source main Java, and here in my application at the same level, my application.java is what we will use to declare our custom REST API, custom activities, custom commands, custom data page queries, and so on. So first of all, we are going to see how we can create a custom activity. That will be our first step. So as you can see, for Java, I'm using IntelliJ IDE, which is a Java editor. It's not a tool I'm recommending. It's just, I got a license for it. I think you can use a community edition, which is free. I like it very much because for debugging, that we will see later, it's much faster than Eclipse, but you can totally use Netclipse or another Java IDE. It doesn't really matter. So let's see how we can create an activity. So we are going to create, first of all, a new class. We are going to call it sample app my activity. I'm always very bad with names. So here I have a class, and the very important part is to be implementing the service. So service is something that we import from BMC. So from BMC RC service common. So it's going to be automatically imported. Then we need to declare our action. So we are going to use the action decorator from BMC. I'm going to name it sample action. No, I called it my activity. And the interesting part is going to be the scope. I'm going to use scope.public. I'm going to explain why in a minute. And of course, here I need to declare. So it's going to be my activity. So what does it do? So first of all, we have this action. So it's going to say that we will have a process activity. This is a name. So this is not mandatory, the name. If you don't put it, it will just divide it by the name of the method. But it's a good practice to use this name property. The scope is very important because you have two different scopes that exist that you can find here. For example, you have one application and one public. Application would mean that application of bundle would mean that you can use only your object within your current bundle. So let's say that you create a library, for example, to send a text message, and you could use this activity within processes from this bundle. But if you have another application and you try to use it, you wouldn't be able to do that because the scope would be limited to the originating bundle. So if you want, for example, your activity to be used in other bundles, you would have to set the scope to public. So usually I find it interesting to put it from the start because most of the time I will forget. So that's a better way to do it. So here we are with our public method. So some things are missing here. So I'm going to say that I have some input parameters. So to declare some output parameters, you have to use a decorator, which is action parameter. And I'm going to say that the name of this input parameter is username, for example. So this parameter shouldn't be blank and not null. So basically not empty. And it's going to be a type string, which needs to map. So here we are with our input parameter. We could have another input parameter if we wanted to, but I know it's a point. And for now it's going to return a string. So now it's complaining because I guess I don't return a value. Yeah. So I'm just going to return string result equal username hello world, and for now I'm going just to return this one. So I've got a string as input and a string as output, and that's pretty much all for my service. So let's see how we can now declare it, because it's created but it's not declared. So for that we have to go inside myapplication.java, like I said earlier, and we have to register our service. So here you have a small example here. So here we're going to put process activities. We are going to do register service new, and you need to put the class. And here we go. So let's try to build and deploy this. So as usual, you need to be sure that you have the right path to the Rx SDK on. So here I have 28, which is not correct. I have 2105. So you can select the Rx SDK I'm using set if you're on Windows and export if you're on Mac. I'm just going to check that it's listing me the right file. And it does. I can see the content of the SDK, the folders that are inside the SDK. So now I can do maven clean install -p export -p deploy. And it's going to take a bit of time, so the build is going on. So I'm going to pause this video and resume it when everything is ready. Okay, so the build has been successful and deployed. So let's refresh our process. And we should have somewhere inside sample application, I should have my activity. So here I have my username, my input parameter. So I'm going to put MAD. And if I'm using another block, let's say compute value, I could see that my activity has an output parameter, which is output. Because he doesn't really have a name, it just returns one string. So here we could save, test my activity. I can choose my process, manage processes, run it. So it runs, so let's see what happened. And we can see that we passed, there is no error, and we can see if we select this activity that its output is hello world Amelie. So that means that it worked. So it's a very simple activity, and we saw that it worked actually perfectly fine. So you can see here that the name is a bit strange. It's come example sample app my activity. That's actually a first. It might be because I used the same name here on my activity, so maybe you didn't like it. So let's try to take something else. I'm going to call it sample process activity, and I'm going to put here sample process activity. So of course it's not going to be really working because I changed the name. So I'm going to remove this really quick, and I'm going to build and deploy. But first of all, we can see here that we just return the string. It's pretty a simple use case, but what if we wanted to return like a complex object? So for that it's very simple. You need to create a new class. So here I'm going to put sample object, let's say, and let's say that you would have maybe two properties. So it would be a string, would be welcome message, and a string that would be the past username. So we want both those parameters to be sent back. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to ask IntelliJ IDEA to do the getters and setters for me, and I need to tell which properties I want to send back. So for that I need to use some decorators as well, and this decorator is it at JSON property. I'm going to do that for welcome message and username. And here in my process activity, I just say instead of returning a string, I'm going to return a sample object. So here I'm going to do that. So result is going to be a new sample object. And here I'm going to do, oops. Here I'm going to say sample object dot set. I'm going to set the username, and here I'm going to set hello the welcome message, set welcome message, and of course I'm going to return the sample object. So let's see, I'm going to build and deploy, and let's see how it's going to go. So I'm going to pause the video and resume it when the bundle has been built and deployed. Okay, so the build has been correctly deployed. So let's refresh Process Designer, and we can see in Sample App that we still have a weird name, which is, we'll correct that in a moment. But let's check the rest. So we have our username, which is Amelie. And let's try to use a compute value this time again. And let's see what is output parameter for activity right now. So we are going to look at custom activity. And this time you can see we have username and welcome message. So it will reflect automatically. So let's try to see why we have a weird name. And the reason why we have a weird name is because the name shouldn't be this one. It should be in one sentence, and will automatically get spaces when needed. So I'm going to deploy and build again. And so I will pause the video and resume it when it has been deployed. Okay, so everything has been built, and deployed. Let's go back to our process. And if we try to refresh the page and we click on it, we have some errors because our process has been changed. I mean, the name of the activity has changed. So let's try to save. And here we can see that our sample process activity this time has a correct name. So that's very important to see that it's not really a label. You don't need to, you shouldn't put like spaces. It's very important. So the username cannot be blank. So I'm going to put a username, Amélie. I'm going to save my process. I'm going to execute it. I'm going to sort bar start time. And here is my sample process activity. And you can see that in the output, I've got an object, which is the class that I defined. So it's working pretty nicely. So now let's see what we could do. So you could basically, by the way, so you could have the same thing. So you could have an object here instead of the string. It would work the same way. But let's say that we have a bug in our Java code and we want to debug it. Let's see how we can do that. So here in IntelliJ IDE, we would need to create a configuration, which is attached to remote JVM, I think, something like this. Remote JVM debug. Here we would put remote Java or IS server Java. We would need to get the IP address, and it's going to be on the port 12444. We're going to apply, and once everything is applied, we need to debug the configuration we just created. And here it cannot connect because I think I did a stupid mistake when I pasted in my configuration. Yeah, it pasted, I copied the IP, but for some reason it copied as well the HTTP. So let's do that again. Debug. And here you can see that I'm connected to the target VM, which is the Innovation Studio server. So of course here it's IntelliJ IDE, you can do exactly the same thing with Eclipse, for example, if you want to. It's just that it's usually much faster to do it with IntelliJ because Eclipse is trying to get all the threads, and by default IntelliJ is getting only the main thread. So it's much faster to connect and actually do step debugging. So here I'm going to put a breakpoint. Here I'm going to back here. I'm going to try to execute my process. And here you can see it's in limbo. And here I am in IntelliJ. I can see my values. Here I can see the value, Amélie. And I can just continue in this case. I'm going to remove the breakpoint. Here it's released. And I can see the value. So here you can debug your Java code very easily. So here I'm going to stop the connection.